Welcome to Frequency. I'm Jenny Field.
And I'm Chuck Gose.
Frequency is your go-to for real talk about communications, culture, and employee experience, beyond the buzzwords and straight to what matters. Now, there's a few things that have been on my mind this week, Chuck, which I thought we could kick off the discussion with. And the first is IKEA. I don't know how familiar you are with IKEA in the
Very
US.
familiar. I'm pretty cultured, Jenny.
Okay. Oh, we're starting well today. So I went to IKEA at the weekend because I needed an office chair, because it's become quite clear that the temporary chair that I had when we moved into our house 4 years ago has given me quite significant shoulder pain. So I had to get a new chair. And my husband and I went, and there's sort of this tradition of having to have the Swedish meatballs in the cafeteria every time you go. And I wondered if that was the same tradition.
Absolutely.
Okay, so it's like a universal, worldwide tradition. You have to have the
Absolutely.
meatballs.
Yeah,
Okay.
of course.
And do you have it with the gravy and the jam, or do you just have them dry? Like, where are you at in terms
All
of
of
that
it.
gravy jam?
All of it.
All of it.
All of
All
it.
of it.
Yeah.
Fries or mash?
I would go fries with that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Good. Okay, that was the first thing that was on my mind.
Ooh,
And then
glad
the
that we got
second thing,
critical issues.
really critical, important stuff here. I should also say that this week I'm not in my normal home studio. I am actually at the Inspiring Workplaces Awards in the dressing room because I'm hosting it this evening. So it's not quite my usual setup, which is quite nice. Got a nice little mirror here with some lights.
And your dress is over your shoulder there.
My dress is over my shoulder, ready to go on in approximately 1 hour. So nothing like cutting it fine. But the other thing I wanted to talk about, which has come up in some of the conversations I've been having in the last couple of weeks, is disagreement and belief. So I was listening to a podcast the other day about politics, and they said the line, you can disagree with someone, but at some point you have to believe that that's what they want. And it got me thinking about the title of my book, which is Nobody Believes You, and about how you want to be believed, to be credible, to be a leader people will follow. But that you can still disagree with people and believe them. And it's come up a few times in workshops I've done with leaders since I heard that the other week. And I just thought it was worth mentioning that you can disagree and believe. And I think we live in a world where people want to not disagree anymore. And we find disagreement quite hard. And I just thought the relationship between belief and disagreement was an interesting one.
Yeah, I almost see the opposite over here, though. I see that people only want to just disagree. They actually really don't even following what their beliefs are. They're actually questioning their beliefs through disagreement.
Yeah, I suppose the thing I'm seeing here a bit is that people are disagreeing, but they want everybody to agree with them, right? They want everybody to say yes, and we're not comfortable with disagreement, I suppose, is a better way of phrasing it. Like, it's not a place we're comfortable, whereas you're right, there's a lot of disagreement. But I think we kind of have to get comfortable with it because it's okay to disagree with
I
someone
think
else.
we've turned into this polarization of it's a versus situation instead of just purely we have different beliefs, we disagree, and that's fine. But it's actually this polarization and is about winning the disagreement, not just simply disagreeing or believing in different things.
So they were my couple of things to kick us off this week, but I know you've been reading all sorts of things, so why don't you kick us off?
And good luck this evening, if I forget to say that at the end of our recording. Yep, absolutely. I know there's a lot of work that goes into that. And few people would I let you be delayed in recording for this episode, Jenny, but Matt Manners, give him a hug from me, is absolutely one of those people. So for this episode, Jenny lined up 4 stories that I think start to keep us continuing to connect the dots on this conversation we keep having. One is around a Gallup study that gives us something of a bit of a paradox around remote workers being both engaged and distressed. We're going to look at how modern IC pros are borrowing skills from journalism to stay relevant. Talk a bit more about that. And then a big change at Moderna, which I think is fascinating, around IT and HR merging in the name of AI. But we're going to get started with a group you and I are very passionate about that often gets left out of the transformation conversation, which is frontline workers. Very recently, Unily and ScreenCloud joined forces on a new report centered on frontline friction. Some of the data that I thought they shared was very interesting, or should be eye-opening to a lot of people. Some of this is on average, it takes 4.5 days for frontline workers to receive important company information. And we know with how quickly information changes, it might be out of date by that point in time. In some industries, that delay stretches even over a week. So again, old news is old news at that point in time. But from a culture side, it's just a start. 72% of frontline workers say they don't have a strong grasp of company strategy. 64% don't understand leadership's priorities. And only 29% say they feel a true sense of belonging. To me, it's not just a morale issue. Morale goes up and down all the time. This focuses back on strategy. We're asking employees and sometimes even demanding employees to adapt, respond, and represent the brand without clarity or connection for them. And one line from the report I thought captured this perfectly. The quote is, businesses are essentially asking their frontline workers to navigate without a map. I'm going to say that again. Businesses are essentially asking frontline workers to navigate without a map. And it's not just about receiving messages, it's sending messages too. Less than a quarter of frontline employees feel their ideas and feedback are heard by leadership, yet nearly 1 in 3 believe the ability to share best practices would actually improve the customer experience, not just employee experience. So Jenni, my question to you, this idea that the frontline is full as untapped intelligence stuck with me. Having worked in frontline before, you see, if you've worked closely with them, you see the knowledge that is there on the frontline workforce. Do you think that companies are too focused on communicating to the frontline and actually missing the opportunity to listen and learn from them?
So I think this report's really interesting, and I think that there are also some questions I have based on the research that I've done in 2019 and 2023 in this population. So it's a great discussion to kick us off because I feel like it's something I know a lot about as well, and have worked with them. So what I think would be interesting is comparing this data with office-based or knowledge workers to see that percentage of people that say they don't have a strong grasp of the strategy or don't understand leadership's priorities or don't have a sense of belonging, because I'm not sure how different that is. And I'd quite like to see that because I think on its own, numbers can say one thing, but with a bit of broader context can say something else. I do think there is a need to listen more. I think in all the research I've done, both for organizations doing an audit with this population or my own research, it is quite clear that they feel that they aren't listened to, but they don't necessarily, and this is based on my own research, it's not that they don't feel listened to by the leadership. And the language of this is important because we use words like leaders and strong grasp of strategy. And I think one of the questions was around company information, important company information. They mean different things to people on a front line to what they mean to us. So when it says it takes 4.5 days to receive important company information, that isn't a surprise to me. What's important company information? If it's a crisis, that should have a different channel altogether. That doesn't necessarily mean that they need to have that immediately. What's important? What does that mean? And unless they've had conversations and discussed that, it's really hard to take the real meaning behind that because they don't have time to talk to each other. They have, I think, something like 15 minutes a week to access communication. It's like 90% of their time is doing the work. So it's going to take time to reach them. Even if you have direct access to them through technology, they're not on their phone and doing stuff. Like it's recognizing that real cultural difference that's there. But I think we are missing a trick from listening. And certainly with one organization we did an audit for, which was looking at sort of manufacturing and things, there was a very clear, I wish they would listen to me more because we could save this company thousands, millions, probably. And I think that is, but that is cultural. That's bigger than communications, I think.
I think the 4.5 day number, probably less shocking to you and I or anybody that's on the front line. I think that's actually a good number for leaders to be aware of. That just because all of a sudden they send something out or say something doesn't mean all of a sudden it's there. It takes time. So as you're sharing a new update 3 days later, well, the first update hasn't really reached people yet. So I think there's that cadence and updating that is more, should be a revelation for them to realize, hey, communication takes time. We can't be snapping things out all the time, different messages, because it's, again, depending on the size of the organization, structure, technology that's there, It's not, sending might be instantaneous, receiving is not.
Oh, 100%, 100%. And I think, again, it comes back to the context of this. Like, what's important company information to the leadership might not be important company
Mhm.
information to a frontline worker. Like, in my research, we identified different types of workers depending on their connection to the organization. And that's really important. If you're connected because of the task you're doing and the skill versus a connection to a brand, the content you need and the information you need is really different to be engaged. So, it's a great number to be aware of, but it's important to kind of interrogate some of the wording on here as well, because it is a slightly different language. And I'm sure when the report's out, there will be a lot more detail in there, because I think as we're recording this, it's not quite out, or there's an event on, I think, as we're recording to sort of
Mhm.
launch the report. So I'll be diving into it, I've got no doubt, in more detail.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's move along to the next story, which I found fascinating for us to think about the future of comms. Moderna just restructured its leadership by merging two of the more traditionally siloed departments that I've seen in enterprise, both HR and IT. They created a new chief brand and innovation officer, now oversees both people and technology, signaling maybe is something of a shift in how the company is now thinking about digital transformation, employee experience, and speed. CEO Stefan Bancel, hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly, said the new model was designed to, quote, collapse time. That is a new phrase to me, that we're
Love
now
that.
collapsing time in enterprise. Fantastic CEO language there. But the focus here is cutting out the friction between teams that he believes should be working more seamlessly together. Even declared that traditional HR model is dead. We've talked about this before. Everybody's trying to murder and kill things. Is the HR model dead? I doubt it, but at least they're trying to see some improvements in it. But I think the big question here for communicators is, this kind of merger can happen to HR. What's going to stop it from happening to comms? Now, I recognize some people might work inside of HR. So are they going to be part of this? Is this the canary in the coal mine? Is this looking to merge some departments into bigger forces? Is this around platforms, integration, data, targeting tools? What role is AI now going to play in this mix at Moderna as we're merging this boundary between comms and digital experience? So I have a lot of questions around this. It was more than news. From your perspective, Jenni, worked in comms for years, does this kind of structural shakeup excite you or worry you? And what opportunities does this present to comms?
So I found this really exciting when I was reading it, because it is, as you said, these traditionally siloed organizations. It's always been sort of HR, comms, IT, and that pyramid, if you like, or that triangle of trying to get that to work. I had the best success doing digital workplace stuff in organizations when I was finally given a technology partner from IT. So I had like an IT business partner that was working with me to help me develop the tool, both so we would work on it from a technical perspective and the comms user need, all that sort of stuff. And we did some great work doing workshops and figuring stuff out because we were able to work together on it. And I think so often that's not the case. And I know other people have had great success doing that. For me, what I think is exciting is this is the first organizational blend I have seen that's looking at employee experience. I wouldn't be surprised if comms comes into this next as well, because if we're looking at employee experience, which is the three things for me, which is sort of your culture and your communication, your tools and your processes, and the environment that you're in, that covers IT, comms, and HR. And I know we've got employee experience roles in organizations, but I think they've just been plonked in at the moment. I think they've just, because I can't say chucked in. So I think they've just been plonked in to the organization without thinking about how that changes things operationally and what really needs to happen. So I'm quite excited because I think really this signals the start of taking employee experience seriously and looking at that whole journey, what that really means, what that needs to look like, bringing people and tech together, and communication and culture inherently will come with that. So yeah, I'm quite excited to see where it goes. Be really interested to watch it and see how it evolves and whether in 6 months' time or a year's time, they go, oh, this didn't work. Let's change it. But this is such a good example as well of where you can be a leader of a function, and not have deep expertise in the two things. You'll have knowledge of the organization and some knowledge across both, but you've got teams that have that deep expertise. And that means you're, very capable at that level of leadership to lead that. And that's important. I can hear people already saying, oh, but it's like a unicorn role. Like, who's going to have HR and tech and be able to do that? But you don't need to at that sort of chief, sort of senior level. It's much, much bigger than that. So I think this is great. What did you think?
I love the idea of them doing something new that
Yeah.
I have at least not seen before, and it makes a lot of sense to bring the people in tech together. I think what I was, again, somewhat impressed by was the title, the Chief Brand Innovation Officer. I would love the
Yeah.
idea of comms reporting into that, because we know the importance of brand when it comes to comms. We also know the importance of innovation, and I wonder if that would help set a new mindset for
Mm.
communicators to think about their role in a very aspirational way versus a very tactical way, knowing there's still tactics that are part of comms, but more
Mhm.
what are we capable of, not what are we limited in doing. So I like that approach. I like that thought process
Yeah.
behind it.
Yeah. And I love that mindset shift that you just said there. Like, what are we capable of? What did you say? I'm going to do a Brene Brown and go, say it again.
What are
You
we
probably can't remember.
capable of versus what are we tasked with doing, essentially.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And that's the mindset shift we need to have. So
Yeah.
I'm excited to see where it goes.
We're going to move on to the next one, maybe a little less surprising, but I think it's a good conversation for us to have. A recent Work Vivo blog post argued that internal comms pros should be taking cues from the newsroom, tapping into their journalistic muscle to stay sharp, credible, and effective. The piece covered familiar ground that we talk about, things like headlines, deadlines, clarity. But stood out was this underlying message that communication isn't just about telling stories. It's about telling the right ones at the right time with the correct urgency and intent behind those stories. The points of the conversation we had last week about how storytelling isn't just a soft skill, a true business skill, and a strategic lever. When done well, it just doesn't inspire employees. It helps organizations move faster, gain clarity, build trust, which is also what good journalism does out there. So in your experience, Jenni, what do you think what's holding communicators back from telling bolder, clearer stories? Is it confidence, access, or something else out there?
So I think there's a lot going on for internal communicators. I thought the blog was really good. It made some really valid points for me about that journalistic muscle, to use sort of your words, around some of the key skills in there around headlines and those things. And it's something that I come back to again and again whenever I'm doing work with teams, and whenever I was working in house. It was always about the headline and what we could do, and how we could make sure people were going to get the story. I also have had experiences where I've tried to get news out and had sort of group or global comms teams saying, oh no, you can't put that out today because we're doing another story. And it was like, oh, that's not how news works. Like, I need to share this today because it's news. It's not just a nice story, it's news. So I think there is understanding news versus content, and the difference between those, I think, is helpful. I think what's holding people back, and I'm reflecting on a conversation I had with an internal comms lead just this week, actually, and we were talking about getting creative and doing a big campaign about something. And we chatted about why that hadn't happened in the past. And she shared with me that she'd got quite excited when she'd come in and said, oh, we could do this, this, and this. And the stakeholder was like, oh, we don't need to do that. Like, we can just do this. Like, we don't want to, blow our own trumpet or whatever. And so she was sort of pushed down quite
Mm.
early on, and then she's just stayed down in that space. Whereas I come in, I was like, well, we could do this and do this and do this. And I think it's that injection of confidence, to your point, like to say, oh, I have got the confidence to do this. This is the right thing to do. And to have someone saying, yeah, let's do this. Whereas I think we spend a lot of time with people saying, no, just get it out, just get it out, just get it out. I do think headlines could always be better. It's the one thing, if I'm reviewing content, that I see all the time, which I think the blog did a really good, it was examples of some of the headlines people have. And I do think that could be better. But interestingly, if we look at the top 10 skills that are needed for internal comms, writing and that as a core skill is always in there. Like, that's not going to go away. Even though we talk a lot about change and AI and all of these things, I often want us to come back to some of these basics. And for me, this journalistic muscle, so being able to write in the content, is a basic foundation of an internal comms role. Doesn't mean you have to be a copywriter, but we need to know how to craft and structure content and stories.
Yeah, I've seen, I would say over the last 10 to 15 years, an influx of former journalists into the world of internal comms, whether it's print journalism, broadcast journalism. And I see that as a huge ad because they
Yeah.
bring also a level of quality to the profession of the editing quality, the presentation quality, the production quality, all of that I think comes in. So I think it's, yes, there's a journalism side, and then there's the M word, the marketing word, that I know a lot of communicators don't like to think of themselves as, but I think there's a little bit of the marketing side that journalists bring to it of selling your story and getting
Yeah.
people, not just, hey, I've got one, let's put it in there, but selling, getting it on the front page. That doesn't just happen by accident. They're pitching it. They're pitching their
Yeah.
stories. They're selling their stories to get it in there. So yeah, it was a good reminder to me of some of those fundamental elements that I think as communicators we can use to strengthen
Yeah.
our business leverage.
Like, as you were just talking then and using the M word, and I was thinking about like my background, right? So I have a degree in marketing, so that is part of how my brain works. And then my career has, started with a blended comms role. I was doing media stuff and internal comms, and then I went and did all media, and then I went and did all internal comms. Like, I've sort of jumped around, so my brain naturally thinks like that. So when I read this sort of blog, I'm thinking, well, yeah, that's just what we do because that's part of how we do comms. But I guess if you've come through HR or pure internal comms or haven't done any of that media side or marketing side, maybe it's not there as a natural thing, but it's just been part of my career from so early on that I don't really think any other way, but I completely understand why you wouldn't. If you've come from HR or operations or different places, that skill hasn't been taught or learnt or developed. And I guess the only thing for me as a huge advocate of professional development would be to take the time to learn. Like, spend some time finding a mentor in this. You don't need to go on courses or workshops necessarily, but find someone in the external comms teams to review stuff and give them the opportunity to critique it. If it's someone you trust and feel they will do it with kindness, then do it. I think it's a huge learning opportunity.
Yeah, I think I have a bit of a soft spot for it because my college degree was in journalism news editorial.
Oh,
And so
there you go.
it was around the importance of stories, but also building stories. It's not a check the box exercise. Really good
Yeah.
stories take time to build the right way. The more time you spend with it, the better they get, the more research you can do. So yes, I just thought that was a good point for us to make. And wrapping things up here around the remote work paradox. We have talked on recent episodes a lot about hybrid versus remote and return to office. And Gallup has some latest research, talked about the importance of headline, makes you do a bit of a double take here. Remote workers are more engaged and more distressed. And at first glance, this seemed a bit contradictory because we're supposed to talk about how remote work is healthier, but yet they're more distressed. But when you dig in, it starts to make a bit more sense that remote workers are, yes, more likely to feel energized by their work and more focused, more productive, and more connected to the mission, but they are also more likely to report daily stress, more socially isolated from the organization, and more emotionally taxed by unclear expectations. So Gallup calls this a paradox. I'm wondering, is this just how work is now? Is just how that employees can love the work they do and still feel overwhelmed by how it gets done? To me, that's where comms comes in. It's not just to inform, but to clarify, guide, and reduce ambiguity for employees out there. I think it also calls for deeper listening, to tell the whole story. You have to understand the emotional cost too when you're sharing this information. My question to you, Jenni, around this, is this actually a paradox? Or are remote workers playing the martyr card a little here?
When I first saw this, I just thought, well, this is why engagement maybe isn't the best measure for what we're looking for in employees. Because if they're saying they're more engaged, but they're more distressed, I do wonder, how are you more engaged if you're more distressed? Like, I don't understand how that can work, because if they are reporting, more daily stress, more isolated, then how are they engaged? Because I can't make that make sense. And I think that's what I'm struggling with the most in this report is it's not a surprise to me that they're more socially isolated, they've got more stress, because I do believe, not a belief, we are social animals. Like we need to be with people and feel connected. Um, and we don't always make the best decisions for ourselves, even though we think it's the best decision. It might not be the best thing for us, if that makes sense. So I don't know that I can answer your question because I do feel like it is a bit of a paradox, and I just don't know that engagement is the right measure, because it comes back to the conversation you and I have had forever, which is, what does that mean? So if you're saying that I'm engaged, then to me, I should have all of this should be positive. I should feel energized by my work. I should be focused. I shouldn't feel isolated, because I should feel like I belong somewhere and feel part of a community. I shouldn't, I can report daily stress, right? That's very personal, but I should have clear expectations. That's a big part of employee experience success, is that expectation alignment. So if that isn't all working, then how on earth can we say that somebody is engaged? I can't make it make sense.
You want me to help you make
Yeah.
it make sense? Okay. So you take the expectations out. We've talked about that in previous episodes. That's a leadership issue. Not properly setting expectations or making those visible to people. How I interpreted this, and I think this is going back to an earlier episode where I said the worst, this comedian talked about the most annoying 5 words you're going to hear is, have you seen the documentary that does the 5 most annoying words you can say? That I think there's an element of engagement, being aware, being dialed in, being focused, and then be able to experience everything that is then happening around you, causing that distress. I think this might be a situation where ignorance is bliss. If you're not engaged, then you may not be aware of everything that's going on. You might not be dialed into some of the pressures at work,
Okay.
some of the other
Yep.
things that are happening. But if you are really, I mean, that's where I think the dangers, I can't remember when it was last really talked about, but the risks of hyper engagement from employees is actually unhealthy, because meaning they're
Yeah.
sacrificing other things. So is it that the more you know, the more stressful
Yeah.
it can be?
And you've just made me think about our conversation, which I think was last week, where I was talking about employee satisfaction rather than engagement, and that to be satisfied, you have to suffer a little bit, which is really paraphrasing, but to feel satisfied, you have to have worked to achieve something to feel the satisfaction. So there has to be some graft and some element in there. So to your point, if you're engaged, then essentially, to take that satisfaction is you're working extra hard, so you feel engaged, and therefore with that comes an element of suffering, because they go kind of hand in hand. To feel satisfied, there has to be some negativity alongside it. To feel happy, there has to be some negativity alongside it, and that this is an example of that. Okay, thank you. I feel I feel like I can make sense of it
I'm
now.
not saying that is that was the way I rationalized it in my brain.
Yeah.
And putting it into the political climate, the people that are really engaged in what's happening politically around the world are ridiculously stressed out right
Yeah.
now. The people that are not, that aren't checking websites every day and getting emails every day and all of that, or scrolling on TikTok,
Yeah.
they're probably not as stressed.
Yeah.
That was my
Yeah.
interpretation of it.
Yeah. I think it's a really great interpretation, and I will reflect on it more. I've got more to think about on it, because as I first read it, I was like, well, this just proves that engagement isn't the right thing. But as we've had this conversation, I feel there's a lot more depth to it, as is always the way, right? It's not, we swim in the grey, and sometimes that's not a comfortable place to be, but we quite like it's this or it's that, or it's that or it's this. And I think for a lot of the stuff in work today, it's not a case of this or that. There's just this sort of messy middle that we're all in.
And that's why we
It's
do
what
this
we think.
podcast, Jenny, to
Yes.
pick
Yeah,
apart that
I feel
messy
like
middle.
I'm benefiting today.
Well, let's wrap this up, Jenny. What are you freaking out about?
My main freaking out about at the moment is why I keep falling into Netflix series on Sundays that I can't climb out of, when I've got other things to do that are more important. And this Sunday, I fell into Ransom Canyon. which is 10 episodes, and I watched them all on Sunday while eating a lot of snacks that I didn't need to eat. And then I get annoyed at myself for not doing the stuff that I could have been doing otherwise. But Ransom Canyon was very good. I mean, it's like trashy ranch stuff. Lovely. It was great. I have thoroughly enjoyed it. So that's my
I
freak
have
out.
not watched it. Probably not going to make the cut. But
I'm surprised.
But I do think, though, it's healthy to have those escape moments. If we're dialed into everything all the time, your brain, I believe, does need those breaks every now and then.
It does, and I really enjoyed it.
Yeah.
So I did every now and then I go, oh God, I did the same thing last week, and I can't remember what that was. But I have yet to watch The Pit, which you had said was excellent, and I've got to find that and watch that. So
excellent,
still on my list.
Here is what
What's yours?
I have two items this week. One of them is what I seem to see on LinkedIn on a daily basis, the defense of the M-dash. For those that aren't using AI or spending time on LinkedIn, there's a criticism, specifically it seems, of ChatGPT, of throwing M-dashes into content. And then the theory was, oh my gosh, if you see M-dashes, people are just copying and pasting from ChatGPT. Well, now out of nowhere, there are these M-dash apologists out there that are like, I've always loved the M-dash. You can't just say because you see an M-dash that it's whatever. And I'm like, you know what this feels like to me a little bit, Jenny, which annoys me, is like when this famous like old musician happens to pass away that most people have never heard of, all of a sudden, like all these fans come out. Oh my gosh, I can't believe so. This feels like this same kind of thing where this critique of the M-dash, like people feel very seen all of a sudden, very exposed. I feel like where they have to write posts defending their use of a punctuation mark. And I'm like, chill. Also, I'm pretty convinced most people who are typing content actually don't know how to put an M-dash into copy. There's no M-dash key on your keyboard, by the way. So I'm calling this out a little bit. I'm a little suspicious of this defense of the M-dash.
Is the M-dash like a hyphen, or is it the one that goes at the bottom?
It's the like longer hyphen.
Well, so there are longer hyphens that do come out when you use ChatGPT, but I just like I mean, I use M-dashes and hyphens all the time. I won't write a post about it to
hyphens,
my use.
Yes. There is a hyphen key. I'm looking at it right now. There is no M-dash key. Because now you're pulling the book editor out of me, Jenny. There's an N-dash, there's an N-dash, E-N, and an M-dash, E-M. The N-dash is the shorter hyphen. The M-dash is the longer one. There is no M-dash key. So, not to say you can't use it. It's grammatically correct to use it. It just seems like there's this weird defense. Like people are taking this like a personal attack that the M-dash is being criticized.
Well, maybe they're not real people, and maybe they are AI bots coming out to defend
you know what?
themselves.
I tend to believe in. I do. I tend to believe it.
They're taking over. That's it.
The other thing that I'm freaking out about, and I did want to verify this story, was this news around Barclays, who is now supporting a British Supreme Court decision. This is their language, where they are going to restrict bathroom usage from trans employees. And I thought it was just the US that was fighting with the trans populations. We apparently don't care yet, which is part of my freak out moment around bathroom usage. We seem to only care about trans athletes in sports. It's such a narrowly thin, even describing it, that percentage of even at the high school level that are trans, but somehow it's violating competitive sports. It's just blown out of proportion. And then to read this story here, I just think back to, let's say, I actually I don't know any that I know of any trans men, trans women out there. But I feel like that's got to be a really tough life to lead right now. That you feel like, are people actually really supporting me? And when you think to basic human needs of, if you're a Barclays employee and you're a trans woman and being told you cannot use the women's restroom, or you're a trans man and being told you cannot use the men's restroom, when in fact it might actually look more strange to see a trans woman walking into a men's restroom. It just seems like they're targeting their own employees without necessarily providing support for them. And I see the same thing happening in the US. Not, again, thank God it hasn't reached rec sports in corporate life, because apparently I don't know what they're going to do with softball teams and basketball teams, because we only care about the athletic fields. So I'm sort of freaking out about seeing that story and thinking, is that going to give another company an idea of a way to target this marginalized group who already probably feels like they're under attack? You know, we say this in our house, trans rights are human rights. Like, I feel like being able to use the bathroom is a human right, and support employees instead of restrict. So that's getting on a bit of a soapbox there, but that's my freak out moment.
I haven't read the whole story, but I remember reading a story about a year ago before the Supreme Court ruling over here. And I saw it because somebody had put it on Instagram and was really angry. And it was to do with toilets again. And the headline was quite deliberately inflammatory. And when I read the article, what the article was saying was basically, we're going to create a third gender neutral toilet. So we're going to have men's toilet, we have women's toilet, and then we're going to have neutral. And actually, I see that more and more. I was at Waterloo Station in London, and there's men's, women's, and gender neutral. And I did go back to the person who was very angry on Instagram and said, actually, if you like reading the whole thing, the headline is inflammatory. This is what it says. I haven't read the Barclays thing. What I did see was a comment from somebody on that article that said, how on earth are you going to police this? Which made me smile, because I was like, why? So I think you can have options, and I think it's about having that gender neutral base that I could go in, you could go in, anyone could go in. I remember watching Ally McBeal when I was younger, and I mean a lot younger because it's a very old TV show. But I remember then their toilets were for everybody, and it was just, these are the toilets, and everyone can come and use them. And they had cubicles and all different stuff in there. And I remember then, I mean, that's going back about 20 years ago, I think, Ally McBeal. It's a long time ago. And that then was like, oh, this is different. But it's become so normal to have that. I walked through a men's toilet the other day to get to the ladies, mainly because I went through the wrong door. But I think there's more to it than inflammatory headlines. And I think that I would hope that a brand like Barclays would be doing more to be inclusive.
We talked about last week the importance of seeing short content and going and finding long stuff. I did want to verify that this was accurate. And I compare it to, so I was reading some of the comments from people, and a lot of it talked about how women had said they will often, if there's somewhere where there's a long queue for the women's restroom, they'll just go into the men's because they just don't want to wait in line.
Yeah.
And you also see at airports, especially like family restrooms, because as a parent of both a boy and a girl when they were younger, sometimes it's not a big deal. Sometimes people make it a big deal if you take your daughter in, or my son into the women's, whatever it is. But it just seemed like this unnecessary stance to take, where you're a large organization, rather than provide support for employees, you're actually saying you're dictating restroom usage, which I'm like, again, there's bigger problems out there for organizations to be focused on. Thank you all for joining us this week. All of the articles that have inspired this conversation are in the show notes, and please do not forget to rate and review after you've listened. Subscribe so that you do not miss another episode, and please pass this along to someone you think would enjoy listening or watching, as you can now also find Frequency and our clips on YouTube as well. Thank you to Poet Ali for contributing music to the show. We'll be back next week with more news, insights, and opinions about everything comms and leadership in workplaces today. Keep tuning in and turning up.